welcome to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 13, and I'm excited to welcome on Shaun Sims, who's currently the head of product at RigUp. So RigUp is the oil and gas industry's leading workforce marketplace and has attracted the likes of A16Z, who recently led their $300 million Series D round in late 2019. So it's often referred to as a breakout marketplace, but one that relatively little has been shared about. So I'm super excited to learn more about it today. So Shaun, before we dive into RigUp, let's maybe start off by you sharing a little bit more about your background for those that don't know about you, and then how you got into marketplaces.
Sure. Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks for the title promotion. I wish I was the head of product at RigUp. I'm the director of product at RigUp, but aspire to be there someday. But yeah, thanks for having me on. So yeah, just a little bit about my background. Right out of college, jumped straight into entrepreneurship. I partnered with a gentleman that was finishing up his PhD in computer science, and we went out to conquer some fraud that we saw and observed was happening within online education, which back in 2009, 2010 was really starting to take off. And so our thesis was, if we can't sort of like make this credible, that online education can't really succeed at scale. And so we developed some interesting algorithms, basically created the equivalent of like a digital fingerprint in the background. So as kind of students were completing their work, we were monitoring them, and we sold that to several customers. We built it to some level of scale, and then we realized the truth, right, which is that a lot of schools don't care about cheating, and in fact, they'd rather not know about it. And so that was an interesting lesson learned, 2 years in, but we made a pivot there, found some success stopping financial aid fraud, and then ultimately just kind of built that business. It sort of went on autopilot, which is kind of where my second act as an entrepreneur started. And I was getting married at the time, and this is like one of my observations was like, all of these wedding vendors are excellent at their craft, but where they struggle is business, like just basic bookkeeping business. And so I set out to build just some really lightweight accounting and bill collection software on top of, at the time, the FreshBooks API. I started to like bootstrap that business, build it up. Actually tried to go and recruit one of the VP of engineers at the Knot. So for those that aren't familiar, the Knot is now the Knot Worldwide is the #1 wedding marketplace in the world, with perhaps the exception of Recruit Holdings in Japan. Tried to recruit a VP of engineering, told him what I was working on. He's like, yeah, that's really great. I'm not going to go work for you, but you should come work for us. And so actually went from there, talked with the team. They were working on really interesting things, which I would kind of call like an attempt to build what HoneyBook has actually like accomplished and built. And so we jammed on that for a few years. And that's really what kind of got me first exposed to marketplaces and kind of understanding, like at the Knot at the time, like what a listings based kind of web 1.0 marketplace looked like, and kind of what it takes to evolve and potentially transition that to more of like a transactional marketplace. And so sitting right in between that transition was just an amazing learning experience for me. Really captivated me around like what marketplaces can be and how great of a business they are, but also like how difficult and challenging they can be at the same time. So from there, hopped around, did a fintech gig for a few years, and then most recently and currently at RigUp.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for sharing more about that. So prior to joining RigUp and kind of like at the Knot, was that experience on the engineering side or product side, or can you just maybe share a little bit more about kind of what you were exposed to?
Yeah, totally. So my kind of career has always been on the product side. At the Knot specifically, I worked on an internal labs team. So we were sort of a self-directed team that consisted of myself, another product manager, a team of about 4 engineers and a designer. And we were really sort of charged with hey, go and run sort of a hypothesis driven model where, we kind of over here, the core business, know generally like where we need to go to transition from a listings based model to an execution or a transactional based model. But we need you guys to go and kind of front run and figure out like, what like not necessarily the next thing after transactional model, but like where can we create value, right? And just kind of gave us the autonomy and freedom to go run a bunch of experiments, right? So at that point, as a product team, we were optimizing for learnings versus just like feature delivery. So also just a really, really great experience. Lessons learned, both good and bad, of operating in that kind of model.
Yeah. So what are some of the maybe some of the key lessons from that?
Yeah. So some of the key lessons, I think, like number one, it can be incredibly difficult to innovate within an existing company. I think that a labs team has to, my opinion is like they have to be really carved out. And it's one thing to let a team sort of be self-directed. It's another to let them potentially ship like features and products that potentially cannibalize the existing business. And that's always the balance that I think is difficult and tricky for internal labs teams. I think it really isn't how you set up the team and can you carve them out? Can you empower them to actually go and potentially disrupt, your business model? So that was kind of like lesson one. And then lesson two is like, if you're in this experiment mode, it's often like, I don't want to say a trap, but it can sometimes become just sort of like you're just stuck in an infinite loop where you're always looking for like the next insight. And you're not actually like moving forward, right? It's like you're just continuing to, like you're stuck in a design loop, right? It's like you're looking for the magic, silver bullet, when like actually, there's something to be said for just more of like the lean sort of agile approach, ship something, get it out in the wild faster, learn and build on it. So I think that was just, and this was earlier in my career, but I think just like separating out, like there is a role that design thinking has to play. You use it to generate insights, and those insights are very valuable. But in terms of actually like moving the business forward, at some point you've got to take those insights, and it needs to translate to something that you put into the wild, so that you can start to get feedback on and like build on top of.
Yeah, I love hearing that. So, cool. So then maybe let's talk about kind of how you joined RigUp.
Yeah, great question. I never thought I would ever work in oil and gas, and this is somebody from Texas. We have a lot of folks in Texas that work in oil and gas, but it always just seemed like a lot of respect for the industry, no idea what happens over there. And so I mentioned I did a stint at a fintech company, and as that was kind of sort of winding down, I was also in like an internal labs team within that company. Started to explore new opportunities and had a friend in the industry that was more on the finance side of it, but knew 3 companies in Austin that were in oil and gas, trying to kind of get into trying to make an impact around like utilizing software to like drive the industry forward. It's like, okay, interesting. And one of those 3 happened to be Marketplace, which was RigUp. And so he happened to know, the founder through his finance background, introduced me to the team. Again, never thought I would work in oil and gas. Honestly, looked at the opportunity and worried that it would be very difficult to kind of accrue the subject matter expertise around energy, oil and gas to like be a relevant product manager. But the team like really sort of assured me that like, hey, a lot of times if you want to change the industry, you kind of need to come from outside the industry. And so one of the things I enjoy and appreciate about RigUp is that I think we've got like a nice balance of like, we like in terms of resourcing, like we've got several folks, lots of teams that really understand how the world works today. But then you've got like the dreamers and the people that like have the vision for like how it can work and how it's starting to work in the future.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think that's super interesting that you bring up the point that like kind of like an outside perspective and fresh perspective is sometimes needed. But yet kind of that you are on the product side, what were the early days like, kind of, I would say just learning about the industry and some of the product insights.
Yeah, totally. Great question. And so even prior to me, right, I think, RigUp was kind of in like experiment mode and like trying to figure out like, what is that scalable, repeatable value proposition, right? So for me, I think, starting kind of more just like philosophically, like what I came in and observed was an industry, a large industry, which at the time was just for us, just oil and gas. We've now expanded and we can talk about that. But this really large industry that's just operating in this just very antiquated way. And of course, RigUp, for those that don't know, like the lens is really around, trying to provide like full stack solutions for skilled labor. And so it's like, okay, within that lens, how can I move this industry forward? And so when you start to like peel back the onion and you realize that like the world, oil and gas works on spreadsheets, it works on closed networks, handshakes, word of mouth, who's, just a lot of just like very, like fax machines. I mean, like, I'm not kidding, like printers that still have the perforated, like, edges that you have to tear off. And it's like, you start to peel that back. But what you realize is like, you come in as a product person and you can see, a vision for like how you can improve things, but like, you have to sort of like understand where the customer is at today. And then you have to think about like, how can I build a bridge to kind of meet them where they're at today? And then so that they can, and then gradually, like over time, like pull them towards like where you, and sell them on that there is a better way of doing things, right? And so I think just, again, more on the philosophical side, I think it was like, that was my observation coming in. It's like, yeah, I can come in like, and just slap on a marketplace model here and like, we would probably be successful, but it's like, but there's nuance where in order to really get people bought in, you kind of have to understand where they're at today and like really just build like stepping stones to sort of get them to where you ultimately want to go. Now, what I would just kind of say to that is like, it doesn't necessarily have to be through product. It's not to say that like product necessarily has to build for like where the market's at today. I think you can build like redundancy, and we could talk about that. Like if they want to like use a phone call to like, like request like a worker, right? That's okay. Like we can build, but we can also have an app like where they can enter in their requests as well. And we can run like redundant like channels for a while, but over time, right? Like we need to see it like moving more and more to the app. There's other ways to sort of solve for that besides product, like operations being one, right? So like one of the great things about RigUp is like ops is always very like, hey, we can be the bridge in a lot of cases, right? You don't necessarily need to build product to be the bridge, right? If that makes sense. And I know we're speaking a little bit philosophically here, but it's like, product can go work on the end state. Ops can also sort of serve in that interim state as well to help bridge that, I call it like behavior gap or transition.
Yeah, it sounds like you're definitely, in an industry that is, it's in the earliest stages for sure when it comes to technology. So speaking on that note, at what stage did you, join RigUp, or at what point of time, and what did the marketplace look like when you joined?
Yeah, great question. So joined in early Q4 of 2018. So we had just recently closed our Series C, I think, at the time. At that time, we were just sort of transitioning from like, hey, we've done like a bunch of experiments, like we understand, like what's resonant. And speaking from the product side, right? Like we sort of start to understand like what's really like creating value versus like what's kind of providing value, and really just sort of starting to focus, right? So it was like, we're doing all of these things. We've clearly found product market fit. It's working. But like, if we're going to get to the next leg of growth, like we need to focus, right? And especially from the product design engineering org, where are we driving the value, right? And so it was like, we're doing a lot of things for a lot of people. How do we really concentrate that value? And so really just broadly, like how that breaks out is we decided like, we just absolutely need to focus our product efforts on kind of the top of funnel. Like, how do we go find the best worker for any given job? How do we operationalize it? Like, how do we make it easy for the requester? So E&P companies, in that case, in the early days, how do we just like make it just seamless, right? So that when they need like they find the best worker, but like logistically, like how does that person arrive on site? And what if it's not one person? What if it's like 350 people? And how do you check to make sure that they're compliant, right? And like, these are really challenging problems, right? And so, but also very solvable through technology if you focus. And so that was kind of the like coming in, it was like, how do we start to focus around that? And then just to round it out on the payment side, right? Like, how do we make sure that suppliers are getting paid, faster, right? Which is a key value proposition that we identified early on, and just needed to lean into. And so that's kind of where I came in. It was like, we were doing a lot of things. We knew where our value needed to be, and it was really just around focusing. And I would say that the organization from Series C to Series D to present has really just been about like focusing.
Awesome. So speaking on that note, because from your guys' site, and there isn't a lot shared about your business as a marketplace. It appears that you have multiple kind of service lines, which I'm assuming speaks to your supply side and their skills. And then also it looks like a multiple kind of marketplace offerings with the workforce and kind of vendor marketplaces. So could you maybe kind of provide like a high level kind of breakdown of how that looks from your marketplace for people that don't know?
Totally. So yeah, RigUp has built one of the largest qualified contractor networks in North America. And what a lot of people don't know about RigUp is that we are not just in oil and gas anymore. So starting in Q3, Q4 of last year, the company decided to diversify into other industries. So still within energy outside of oil and gas, we're in wind, we're in solar, and then outside of energy, we're in construction, and then more recently, what we would call defense, which is in kind of shipyard building. And so we've really diversified the industries that we play in, with the common theme being full solution provider of skilled labor. And so there's commonality across those buyers, like within those industries, around needing a flexible workforce. And so again, kind of coming back to like focusing, it's like, how do we provide this like elastic, flexible workforce that guarantees for any given project or job that those buyers can use and trust RigUp to deliver, right? And so that's really our like core RigUp like product offering. That's where we focus. We do, and this is a project that I'm most familiar with because I work on it full time, is we kind of have we're incubating a new kind of logistics based on-demand marketplace, which is super fun. It's like a small growth bet within the company. And it's just in this completely like this market like you would never know about. And it just happens that there's like this multi-billion-dollar market in West Texas in the Permian Basin to move water from point A to point B. I mean, it is just this fascinating marketplace that like you would never even know about unless you were in oil and gas. And so we're still kind of early in the exploration phase there. We've been at that for about a year and a half. And that's just one of those exciting ways where, we think that like if we can continue to scale like we're scaling there, there's applicability, of course, to expand geographically, but also in the number of service lines that we're in. Similar to how the broader business has kind of diversified and gone into more industries, we believe kind of the logistics-based on-demand marketplace that we're building in the Permian Basin can also sort of be replicated across things like, equipment rentals or, chemical transport and things like that.
Awesome. So I want to talk on that note for a second, which is you mentioned placing like an internal bet within the company. So what are some of the key kind of decision-making factors that are involved in that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so RigUp is a founder-led company, which I think is amazing. I think like that kind of passion, right, is just you can't find it, right, unless it's truly founder-driven. So I think Shin and Mike have done a really great job of like painting the arc and the vision for RigUp, and being like really sort of aggressive and open-minded around like how we can achieve that vision. And so by kind of setting that, like it allows, folks, not just in the product org, but across the org to sort of like think through how we might be able to make that a reality. So, one example of that that we've invested in more recently as a company is around training. We view training as just this huge opportunity to drive value to our suppliers, and especially in kind of the current macro environment that we're in. You see a lot of things around success that we're having around like reskilling, upskilling, and so forth. And it's like, again, I think like the way that Shin and Mike have sort of set this arc and like there's the end state vision of where we want to go, but creating space for people in the organization to kind of like propose and figure out like how we can make that happen. Training being one example, what we call managed field services, which is the logistics based moving water from point A to point B, being another example, and you know, a couple of others, balanced with obviously this need to continue to stay focused, right? You don't want to get to a point, we don't want to get to a point where we're just creating entropy again, right? As kind of like in the very early days, right? It's like controlled entropy, finding that balance of like letting people kind of experiment, but still maintaining focus.
Got it. Got it. Cool. And then, so speaking on the training side and kind of upskilling through your marketplace. So do you have like maybe just like an example of a specific kind of like someone that's skilled on your marketplace that you can speak to as far as that journey from upskilling through RigUp?
Yeah, totally. And I'm not as familiar with it as those teams, but absolutely, like we're seeing more and more examples of that where, you know, somebody in the oil and gas space, so maybe maybe a drilling consultant, for example, or, you know, let's just say a roustabout, which is kind of like a handy person that can kind of go out and do miscellaneous things on a well location. A lot of opportunity, and we've seen success with taking kind of that profile and offering things like training around solar panel installation. So it's like, yeah, like that would be like one example that we're seeing more and more of. It's just like, yeah, as oil and gas kind of contracts, opportunity within renewables. So in this case, like solar, to go and use those skills. And I think, you know, there's kind of this Venn diagram, right? Where it's like, here's oil and gas and here's the other verticals that we're in. And what we're finding is that like that overlap where like the skills actually do, that they do sort of translate, is bigger than we thought. And where it's not, right? Like for things that fall outside of that Venn diagram, that's why we're investing in training, right? Because we're like, we're committed to helping our suppliers, our workforce, level up, right? And upskill so that they do have access to greater economic opportunity.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. So on that kind of note too, so since you're in quite a few verticals, are you typically, I would say maybe we can even focus in on one for an example, but you know, are you supply or demand constrained, would you say?
Yeah, great question. I would say that like in the early days, we were very focused on supply. So we knew that we needed to build the highest quality network of supply as just like that step one. You know, it's hard for me to like sort of put a pin on it. I would say that like, I would say like this within managed field services. So like moving water from point A to point B in the Permian Basin, we are largely demand constrained. The dynamics of, you know, oil field services right now, just in general, there's a surplus of supply. You know, demand is sort of flat to down. So you were demand constrained, right? And so the broader business though, and again, I like let less the person to speak to that, but I think like what I would say is like, you know, we started supply constrained and like now, you know, I don't want to say like we're shifting our focus, but like we're becoming increasingly more focused on like identifying and providing value on the buy side, to kind of like figure out how we can like deepen our moat, right? Because, you know, you can create more defensibility generally by working on the buy side. And we are finding commonalities, what we kind of call like, or what I would call at least common denominator of value that kind of goes across those industries. And, you know, generally like just what that looks like is like, can RigUp deliver this flexible, elastic workforce, right? And can they do it safely, reliably, and efficiently, right? I mean, it's just like focusing there. We'll continue to like deepen our relationship on the buy side. So yeah, it ebbs and flows.
Got it. Yeah, and then so on that too, what is the kind of like matchmaking process, I guess you could say, or you know, the liquidity like in the marketplace from a user experience side?
Yeah, totally. So this is kind of one of those like hard but solvable, you know, problems that we talked about earlier. It's like for a lot of these skilled trades, right? There are things that, any other sort of kind of marketplace for job listings is just not well equipped to handle. And a lot of that is around certifications, staying into compliance. Of course, there's background, there's criminal checks, there's drug screenings, and all of these things there's timers on all of these things, right? It's like they expire, and it's like, so it's just table stakes, like understanding like how, like, is this given person like even capable of doing this job, right? It's just like step one, right? And it's a huge problem. But again, it's something that technology is really well positioned and suited to solve for. So once you kind of understand, like, okay, this person is qualified, well, then there's the next layer of like, well, is this person the best person for the job, right? And that's where it starts to get really interesting, right? And the way that we sort of approach that, right, is like, yes, there's like there's resumes, like we do want the inputs from the user, right? But in order to really get like, more sophisticated, right, it takes like getting feedback loops from their actual performance, like in our network, right? And so a lot of our focus is on sort of like, how do we collect that feedback from the buyers so that, we do understand that, hey, this person actually succeeded in this particular project, right? Or role. So that's part of it. And then just applying, so we've made a lot of investment into our, what we call our network team, which is, very data science driven. Like, how can we start to look at this stuff at scale, and make really smart decisions? Again, all with the goal of getting the right person for the right job, onto location.
Got it. And then also too on the demand side. So is it kind of like an RFP kind of process where they can say, hey, we're looking for this, or is it more of like a search process, or is there a concierge,
Yeah, so it varies. So this is maybe an interesting, kind of, you asked about early days of RigUp. So early days of RigUp, we started as a very, very much an open marketplace. So for those that are familiar with open marketplaces, I know I'm talking to a marketplace savvy crowd here. We just sort of like created the sort of forum for buyers to meet suppliers. Of course, there's like the table stakes vetting, right? But like once you kind of got past that, it's like, we just sort of expected buyers and suppliers to meet, right? But what we found is that, it's not quite that simple, right? And in a lot of cases, buyers are used to calling, a brick and mortar, company that kind of has, the Rolodex, or the contact list on their phone. And they're just sort of kind of like doing that manual matchmaking, right? And so this is again going back to that same theme of like meeting customers and their behavior of kind of where it's at today and trying to transition them to the future. This is a good example of that, because it's like we realized that like a purely open marketplace was not working, right? We needed to step in and start to become more of a managed marketplace. And then that's what we've done, right? So now it is the case where it's like, we do sort of take in a request, right, in a variety of different channels, right? Ultimately, we want them to converge on the most scalable channels. But, again, it's this bridge concept of like building to where they're at today, managing the process to get them there. And then we can focus on automating, right? So it's like, yeah, it's basically like, open marketplace to managed marketplace. Next step is what I would call like an autonomous marketplace, right? Where it's like, you're still getting the hands-on approach, but it's just done in an automated way that isn't so like, human managed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So just so we can know, as far as like some context on the time frame for that. So how long would you maybe consider RigUp as more of like an open marketplace, and then the transition to more, manage, and maybe some like product kind of levers that are attributed to more liquidity? And then, at like what stage of the journey are you right now?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I think open marketplace was, it was still sort of around when I joined. So, later 2018, I think like really at the beginning of 2019, we just sort of, we knew that we needed to lean in more on the managed side. And yeah, so what does that look like, right? Well, we want to control OpEx, right? So a lot of the product investment there was like, how do we build scalable channels to take in and facilitate from end to end, getting somebody on location, helping them actually complete the job to the extent we need to, and then getting them paid. And so it was really about like what do we build from a product perspective so that we can control OpEx. And then once we sort of got there, right, then it's like, okay, now, and this is, so I'd say like, how long did that last? Honestly, probably all of 2019. I'd say like 2020. Now it's like, okay, we can kind of take a deep breath. We've got this. We've got this down. So now sort of products focus is more like how can we scale this and really become more of the automated marketplace versus just the human in the loop managed process. So in terms of product levers, I think really the product levers in the beginning were like our customer was really like, okay, ops, like how do we help ops scale, right? But now our customer, like that's sort of stabilized, and it's like that's not our customer, right? Our customer now from a product perspective are our buyers and suppliers, which is really liberating and freeing in the sense that like we don't necessarily have to just say, hey, we've got to make this process 10x scale. It's like, no, we're freed up to go and build the better process, right? And again, the lens there is always going to be how can product get somebody there safer, more reliably, and more efficiently. And so that's where it starts to get really interesting, and product levers, that I think are more exciting come into play, right? It's like assuming we have sort of like baseline data and we understand, the logistics of getting somebody from to location all the way through the job to payment. How can you actually start to improve on that, iterate on that, just continue to drive deeper value for both the supplier and the buyer? And what we found is like generally when you create value for the supplier throughout that process, as a byproduct of that, the buyer's getting so much value just in terms of transparency that they've never had before, predictability, faster, like payments are happening faster, which benefits the buyer as well from like a days outstanding perspective. And so that's kind of where we're at now, I'd say, like especially as we get into the second half of 2020.
Cool. And then you said maybe some of the exciting kind of like levers is one of those payments, or could you maybe mention one as an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like what comes to mind for me is kind of the project that I'm closest to, right? Which is, how do I move water efficiently from kind of point A to point B? And, one of the things that we're most excited about is, basically like, it's an interesting model because, and again, I don't want to like go down a rabbit hole where I talk about it for 30 minutes, but, essentially the way it works today is like, a driver has a shift and they're paid per hour and they go and kind of like do as many sort of pickups and drop offs as they can in a day. And what we're doing is we're introducing like what is a per barrel price, right? So just that like slight shift from like, hey, now I'm not necessarily paid by the hour, I'm actually paid by the barrel. My entire incentives and how I think about my day are completely shifted. And by the way, RigUp is providing me the tools to understand and visualize my performance, and tools to improve my performance through the app, right? So like, here's how I can like manage my day and like make more efficient routes, right? Here's trip guidance, here's route data. And so like by doing so, right, winning more work in the system. And so like, to me, that's something that like only product can really do, that like we're super excited about and we're seeing it work.
That's super interesting. So you're basically kind of changing the compensation model in some sense and saying, hey, we're pricing it on a performance kind of standard we're creating versus, an hourly rate, right?
Totally. It's a huge behavior shift, but I think it's also one of those good examples of like, we started out per hour, right? We were able to show the benefits of per barrel. It creates a surplus in the system that benefits really all three parties, right? It benefits the suppliers. They're earning more dollars per shift, right? They're doing it more efficiently. And as they are doing it more efficiently, right, that allows cost savings that we can pass to the buyer or that RigUp can retain in the form of margin, right? And so there's this like beautiful kind of structure that we're kind of in the like just about to scale that phase for water hauling.
Interesting. So is that just that performance kind of model? Is that just specific to that one example, or because it seems like that's not typical kind of outside of the RigUp platform, right?
Um,
Whereas,
yeah. I would say like, so is it applicable outside of just the water hauling context?
yeah,
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, that's how like exactly. Yes. We think about how to like for a given job, like let's just say for a given job, like how do we get the person out there that's the right person for the right job to do the work more efficiently? It's all the same thing, right? And by doing it more efficiently, it creates a surplus in the system. Suppliers are making more money. RigUp can pass the cost savings along to buyers or keep it in the form of margin
got it.
or both.
Yeah, I assume so with efficiency. Also, I had a question, and feel free to kind of skip over if you can't speak to it that much. But the monetization model.
Yeah, RigUp's a transaction-based model.
Okay, got it. Cool. So we do have a few questions, but before we jump into that, do you have any any kind of insights? I know there's quite a bit from your time at RigUp, but anything in particular that you'd like to share with us as marketplace founders?
Yeah, no, great question. I think like my biggest learning and takeaway from RigUp is like it. So understanding customers, right, and it is critical. I think I'm going to sound a little bit like a like I'm repeating myself, but I think like again, it's just like understanding customers and where they're at today, and not necessarily getting trapped and like optimizing for the way that they're currently working and the status quo. I think like, and maybe that's just me from like a product background. I think like product managers can tend to like look at problems and then like immediately want to go and solve them and like improve the lives of their in the way that their customers get their jobs done. But I think there is something more powerful to be said for like understanding that, but still being able to like stay disciplined and like build towards the future state. Like that's really hard to do. And it's something that like takes an incredible amount of discipline, like even for myself, that I try to tell my teams to just stay focused on that. So yeah, it's like you got to understand your customers. You got to understand where they're at today, and to some extent, you got to meet them where they're at. But at the same time, right, in order to like move an industry forward and like really make material change, like you're going to have to do stuff that like you're less confident on whether it's going to work or not. So I'd say like just having that superposition like held in your head is like probably like one of the most things like I found like it has been a growth area for me like at RigUp, that I feel like I've been improving on and have benefited because I've taken that approach.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So cool. So we're going to open up for a few questions if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Doc, did you want to come on with your first question?
Sure. Oh, thanks so much, Shaun, by the way. And you're in Austin, so Ironworks Barbecue is pretty much the only reason I go to Austin every year.
That's awesome.
I love that place. So I just have a couple questions. The first one was, I noticed that on RigUp you had like so many different things like workforce, vendor, and then managed field services. I was wondering, which side of the market did you focus on first to scale it and then go from there?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, RigUp's the majority of our business is on the workforce side, and that's where we started, right? What we found and sort of like why we evolved to vendors, it's like the buyers, it's just it's just natural, right? It's like I need a person for this, or I need a service, right? And the vendors were just like this ecosystem that we're like, yeah, absolutely, like we need to be able to like roll those in and tuck those into our platform. So yeah, while workforce is the lion's share of RigUp, vendors are still a very important part. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially as we go into these other kind of, industries or go deeper, I should say, in the industries that we're in, like how much of a role vendors play, in construction or maritime, whereas we know how big of a role they play in oil field, for oil field services. And then managed field services is sort of started about, I want to say like 18 months to 2 years ago, I was really just like a growth bet. And the whole thesis around that was like, hey, we've got this like thriving workforce. Like, how can we like actually help them do their job better? And at that time, one of our deepest concentrations of workforce were like drilling consultants and field consultants out in the oil field, and water hauling being the massive TAM, like the number one OpEx spend category for those buyers. It just made sense for us to like go and take a shot there. And again, it was just sort of like folding into our North Star of like, how do we like empower the suppliers that empower the world, right? So like it thematically made sense. It made sense from how do we leverage our existing like assets, so to speak, like workforce, and make their lives better. So that's kind of like how it's broken out. With, you know, so again, just to recap, like workforce being the lion's share, vendors being a smaller share, and then management services being really kind of more of a growth bet within the company.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah. Let's get Ironworks someday.
Definitely, man. Love that.
Awesome.
Cool. So Suzanne, did you want to come on?
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, you mentioned that I got the sense that much of the original, the people that you were dealing with were not tremendously tech savvy from what you said. And I'm dealing with older people who are also not tech savvy. So I'm finding a lot of the similar situation with phone calls, a lot of individual onboarding. Was that your experience as well, that a lot of it had to be, they needed a lot of hand holding in the early days? And if that is true, how did you move them away from that without upsetting them? Or did you just decide not to?
I love that question, because it's like, it's so at the heart of the industries that we're in. So yeah, absolutely. I think, just like you said, we did realize, yeah, for a lot of folks, we do need to have communication channels, right? And ways for them to interact with RigUp that are not Uberized, you know? And so, you know, how do you open up those channels, meet the customer where they're at today, right? And then ultimately you want to capture that and get it into your platform as quickly as possible so that everything downstream can be automated. So I think that was kind of the challenge. It was like, you know, we were good with like the top of the funnel, like meeting you where you're at today to kind of identify the need. And then, but then it's like, okay, once we do that, everything downstream, right, is going to be on our platform. The other thing I would say, and I don't know about your demographic necessarily, I think for our demographic, one of the things we've observed, and I've observed even in just the last 2 years, is just like on the macro level, like folks are starting to like order groceries from their phone. And it's like that alone has really like just driven just this more macro adoption and like willingness to use technology to get jobs done. And so part of it is just like talking to folks, and it's like, hey, you use your phone to order groceries. Like there's no difference here. Like it's the same thing. And so there's a little bit of that too, that I think is like has been a tailwind for us. But yeah, it's challenging. I'd say like for us, it was meeting them where they're at today, making them feel comfortable, and trying to kind of build the bridge to get them to use what you want. But if you can't, at a minimum, it's like capture the request and then like just make sure everything else downstream is automated.
And how long did that take? I mean, maybe you weren't with the company then, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you're talking. I mean, it's behavioral change, right? It takes a long time. I don't even know that I'd say like we completely solved it. I think as we've gotten to scale, we've had more leverage to basically say like, hey, in order to use this, like you have to do this. And so maybe that's what I would say is like at some point, right, your value and your offering will become so important to that user that you will start to have, I don't like saying leverage over users like the bad way, like the wrong way to say it, but I think you'll know what I mean, right? It's like they'll want to use however you sort of say like, this is how you communicate this to me or work or interact with my platform. They'll want to do it even if it's the only way, because you're creating so much value. So I think that's also what happened with RigUp. It was like, at some point, it was like, when they didn't trust us, they didn't know who we were. They're like, I'm not going to try this new process because I don't trust it. And so it's like, we built the trust, we built the bridge, we got to scale, we proved our value. And then we started to kind of close off the channels, you know, at some point, right?
Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Awesome. That was a great question. Thanks for the answer on that, Shaun.
Yeah.
So, hey, Marina, did you want to come on?
Oh, she's on mute.
Oops, sorry. Yes, you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Hi, this is Marina from Barcelona. I'm just was wondering, how do you do the matching at the workforce marketplace? If it's manual, I think that at early stage was manually, or if it's an algorithm. And the question is, if you do an algorithm, you develop inside or you both? What do you recommend?
Okay, so just so I make sure, yeah. So the first part of the question, so we started like in the early days, like absolutely like manual. We need to understand like what's important to the customers. You know, what's the signal and the noise, right? And so like you start to see like, well, there's table stakes things like they have to be compliant, and so it's like, okay, we've got that. But then like, okay, once they're compliant, available, ready to work in the like, then what makes them a good you know, a quality, right? Like how do you define quality, right? And so kind of a huge exercise to go and like understand what that looks like from all of our buyers' perspectives, from the supplier themselves perspectives. And yeah, like a lot of manual, like a lot of just like switchboarding in the early days, but like clearly not scalable at all, right? So like the only way, like out of necessity, that we could scale that was to automate it, right? And so we have built in that matching algo internally. Like it's not something that like we outsource or anything like that. All homegrown and all using like proprietary knowledge that like we've been able to like amass by like talking with people on the phones and like in the very early days of RigUp, like just collecting all this information, right? And understanding like where the value is and what makes a good match. Which I would also say like just to round trip it, right, is like the feedback loops at the end. So it's like, even though like we're hearing these things like and we're using them in our matching algorithm, it's like we have to like feed back in the feedback, and like as quantitative as we can get that, obviously the better. But depending on like the type of work and so forth, like it can be sort of it can be tricky, right? And so kind of a technology you know, problem there that you know we're still solving.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Hey, I actually had a question for you, Shaun, and that was, you know, in order to prevent disintermediation through your platform, since it is a talent marketplace, you know, aside from accruing reputation and then also kind of the upskilling, you know, I would say with the training, is there anything, for instance, like insurance or anything else that, you know, kind of locks in the talent, so to speak?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I was going to mention, yeah, insurance is a huge component to trying to like sort of like lock in and like really show value. You know, yeah, I think you said it right. I mean, it's like if I were to weight it, right, I'd say like getting people paid faster is huge, but like even better than that, right, is just like the sort of like the amount of opportunities, right? So like we, for suppliers, want to show them the right work for their skill set that fits the parameters of what they're looking for in a project, right? So like a lot of it is just like regionality. It's like, I don't care about, I don't want to go work, you know, across the country. Like I want to work in my geo. And it's like, yeah, totally. So like part of it is just curating for them. Here are the best opportunities. I know that if I log into rigup.com, like I'm always going to find the best opportunities for me. That's really difficult to find. If you look at kind of like the status quo of like where these projects become available, it's like your head would explode. It's just like, I can't even, I'm going through like job boards, right? Or like project lists. And it's just like, it becomes quickly overwhelming. So I think it's like there's table stakes is the wrong way to say it, but just like that key value props around, you know, getting paid faster, insurance, I think there's higher order things like curation, finding them more job opportunities. There's training, right? But really at the end of the day, I think it's like logging in. I know I'm going to find the best like curated set of opportunities for me. Like to me, that is where that's what keeps suppliers coming back.
Yeah, that's pretty compelling. So, are there any other kind of non-transactional benefits, through your marketplace that you guys have added as you've, reached the scale that you're at?
So sorry, what do you kind of mean by non-transactional benefits?
Maybe any kind of like network kind of base, like connectivity to others, or whatnot.
Got it. Yeah, totally. Not so much yet. I think, we did some experimentation around, how do we like build a community, a network, when we were kind of in the oil and gas space. And, honestly, frankly, it didn't work. I would say it went somewhere where we didn't think it was going to go. But not to say that we shouldn't revisit that and think through that in the future, because I think looking forward, as we're growing and our network gets bigger and bigger, there's going to be massive opportunity to leverage that network. And I would say that we're thinking about it, but we're not actively working there right now.
Got it. Cool. Let's see. Hey, Brett, did you have a question? Want to come on? Shaun, actually kind of based off of these, off the questions that we're asking, did you have anything in particular that you wanted to share?
Just more generally?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. No, I mean, nothing immediately comes to mind. I think, I think the behavior questions are super interesting. I think how do you go from 0 to 1? I think, for me, I think it's just I'm always curious, what industries folks are working in. And I think picking a very unattractive, non-sexy industry like oil and gas, I think is, it was bold. I think what I've learned about oil and gas, right, is just, it's sort of this, and maybe we're sharing just quickly, it's this really interesting tale of two cities almost, where oil and gas companies are some of the most innovative companies, arguably in history. I mean, I'm not exact. If you look at the last 10 years, how much innovation has happened with horizontal drilling and fracturing, right? So fracking. I mean, it has allowed the U.S., right, to become, as of 2019, a net exporter of oil, right? Which means we're energy independent. We're sending out more oil than we're getting. So all of there's that story, but then there's this other story where it's they're arguably one of the least innovative around software, and it's leveraging software to drive OpEx. And so it's you see all this innovation on kind of the hardware, physical asset side, but almost none on the software side. And I think for me, that's just where the original initial appeal, and still to this day, is for going and finding some industries like this, and why I stay at RigUp and love working there. It's just it's just completely blue sky. And so I think for RigUp to come in there, it's just on the product side, we could literally think through what a 10-year roadmap might look like. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but let's call it 5 years. I think we could do it. But I all that to say, always curious what industries people are working in. Never thought I'd be in this industry, but now that I'm in it and have gone deep, it's man, this is so fascinating.
Yeah, you have me super interested in it now. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I was going to ask about the move into the energy space, but speaking on some of the founders, we have Kyle who had a question. He's actually has an interesting marketplace for food trucks, so I'll let him come on and ask a question first.
Hey, thanks for coming on. This is a really interesting industry. My sister's boyfriend's in the oil industry, and I always ask him questions about that. So you spoke about charging. From what I remember, you spoke a little bit about something about charging for a different percentage based on the value that's added. Was that true, or I can't remember how you exactly touched on it, but I'm curious about that part of the business.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, so in terms of like transaction, how we monetize, I mean, what I can say is like, we do offer like different options. I think, like, and like, if you were to focus if I were to focus the response around like payment, we offer like things like expedited payment, right? And that would be like additional transaction costs, but like, yeah, like in general, like there shouldn't be like a lot of variability across it. I think in the case that there was, it would be like something that like directly benefits like the supplier, for example, getting paid, same day.
Gotcha. And do you have different tiers for like features with the like supplier versus the buyer? Like how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I would say that our value propositions and offerings are fairly consistent. They will vary across like the different industry verticals, right? Just because there's like nuances and differences in the industry verticals. But like within a vertical, no, we don't do a lot of like tiering. Really, it's just the transactional model is what it is, and like yeah, there may be some variability around things like payment terms, but it's not super, it's not super over engineered in the sense of like, we focus on our core value. We focus on value creation for the suppliers and the buyers. And it's like, we don't have a lot of like intentionally like sophisticated like tiers and matching or anything like that.
Okay, cool.
Well, we're almost out of time, but before we wrap up, I do have one, I guess, last question or point I wanted to ask about, which is kind of the move into the energy space. And could you maybe just share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just like the decision to get into energy.
Yeah, just more about the decision and kind of in general.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, like, I think that's one of the biggest, asks of candidates that we get in that come and interview at RigUp. They're just like, I don't know anything about energy. And I was in the same boat. Again, like kind of said earlier in the call, right? I never thought I would join the energy space, even growing up in Texas. My in-laws live in the heart of the Permian Basin, like in Midland, Texas. I've spent a lot of time in Houston, but yeah, never appealed to me, right? Because when I used to think about oil and gas, I was like, seems really hard, it just seems like that's happening on another planet, honestly. And in a lot of ways, it kind of is. Like if you drive out to West Texas, I mean, some of those roads, it's like you're on Mars. Like, I mean, I'm not kidding. Like it is just a different frontier out there. But what I think for me, like making the jump, it initially, like being completely honest, it was like, I'll learn about the energy space. I'm not necessarily like super passionate about it at that time. It was like, oh, you're working on a marketplace kind of idea, right? Well, not at that point, but like you've got a marketplace in oil and gas. Like, okay, cool. I want to check out the marketplace side. I'll learn oil and gas. So that was like the first step into it. I would say now that I've gotten energy and like really understand like the workers like in the energy space, build a lot of empathy, like understand like actually like if we didn't have these people, we wouldn't have lights, right? I mean, it's insane, right? How critical these folks are to like our infrastructure and keeping the lights on, literally. And so I think like over time I've built empathy, like learned about these folks. And then, if you look at like energy more broadly outside of oil and gas, right? And this is one of the things that, we're excited about internally. It's like we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind, under the renewables category. And even the oil and gas companies themselves will tell you, like, they're making investments in solar and wind. And it's like, you kind of see this vision for like where we might be able to go. And then all of a sudden you kind of feel like, hey, I'm actually like part of something that is important and matters. And not to say like, my prior experience at, like the not, for example, like didn't matter, wasn't important. Of course it is, right? Like it's a joyous thing that people do. It's a key thing. It's a key event, but it's like lights on. That's important. If that goes away, we're in trouble. So yeah, I don't know. It's been an interesting thing. It's a great question, right? I mean, I don't know that I've been like extremely introspective about it until this point, but no, talking out loud, I'm like, yeah, man, I'm glad I'm in this space.
No, I realize it too. I'm like, if your mission is to increase, efficiency for critical services, then I don't think it can get any better than that. So,
Cool.
Well, cool. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat with us. This was super interesting because I know there isn't much that's shared on RigUp. So do you have any, where can we keep up with you?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter. So Shaun Sims on Twitter. Hit me up on LinkedIn. That I keep a relatively low profile, but those are the places. You can also email me. So shaun.sims@rigup.com. We would love to chat with you guys, and then of course participating in the Slack channel or Slack forum that you've got set up for us. So I'll be around. I'll be present. And thank you, thank all of you for letting me talk with you. Enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, this is definitely a treat for us all. So I really appreciate it.